Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick and here with Bruce Fein. Welcome to another The Fein Print. We're hoping that Dennis will be joining us shortly. Um, I know the title of this week is there an end game? Was there ever even a plan? But I wanted to start off with something else briefly. So, Bruce, if you can indulge me, I want to read uh, a recent truth from Trump. Like ironic to see those two words together, and in Trump's because I think and Dennis just wrote he was coming in, so we'll
I
go
think
with
we call that Jeffrey an oxymoron, right? Like
exactly.
bittersweet, truth and Trump. Yeah.
And maybe this is something you want to comment on as well. So first I'm gonna read it. This is what he posted. Uh, the decision that mattered most to me was tariffs. The court knew where I stood, how badly I wanted this victory for our country, and instead decided to potentially give away trillions of dollars to countries and companies who have been taking advantage of the United States uh, for decades. So, I mean, there's more, but I just want to let's parse this, okay?
Mhm.
So, Bruce, you sit on the Supreme Court. Is a factor supposed to be how much the president wants a certain policy? Is that the job of the Supreme Court? If they know the president really wants something, that their job is to give the president what they want?
Of course not. In fact, the job of the court, especially in constitutional adjudication, Jeffrey, is to check the president and Congress when they've overstepped constitutional bounds. That that's why we have a constitution. The Constitution
And are
says
you saying that if a president wants it, that they should, the nerve of the Constitution and the court to restrain the president when he really wants something?
yes. There are famous
James
words.
Madison, how unreasonable could James Madison be?
Yes, this is
Unbelievable.
there are very famous words of Justice Robert Jackson. This is in the flag salute case, where he says the constitutional rights are not subject to the outcome of any election. They exist independently of popular opinion. And that's true whether it's the Bill of Rights or some other provision of the Constitution, for example, giving the power to raise revenues exclusively to Congress, not the President of the United States. So whether Trump wants something or not is irrelevant to whether it's constitutional or not. So that's a huge blunder, I believe. And moreover, also think, Jeffrey, of the inconsistency of his statement. He says that these we've been taken advantage of for decades, including the first Trump term. And in order to trigger the statute that he relied upon to justify these tariffs, he had to declare a national economic emergency. So he's saying something that has existed for 20 years suddenly becomes an emergency when it wasn't before, although nothing has changed. So it shows that there's no intellectual content to this. It's just a campaign statement trying to arouse, his mega crowd and cast aspersion on the court is what it is. But in terms of constitutional law and logic, it's an F minus.
Dennis, what we're talking about now is the quote that from Trump's post on his platform that, and this is the first sentence of it. The decision that mattered most to me was tariffs. Excuse me, the second sentence. The court knew where I stood, how badly I wanted this victory for our country, and instead decided to potentially give away trillions of dollars to countries and companies who have been taking advantage of the United States for decades.
Yeah,
So,
the president may feel one way, but his feelings do not necessarily remotely connect to the Constitution. I think Bruce covered that pretty well.
Yeah. And in fact, Jeffrey, if we could just, I'm old, so I remember these things. We used to have a president called Richard Nixon, right? And remember, he told David Frost, if the president does it, that means it's not illegal.
right.
And he made that argument to the U.S. Supreme Court to justify withholding the tapes from Special Prosecutor Jaworski. He lost unanimously, despite making, I really want to keep the tape secret. You know what? He really, really, really wanted it, and he lost 8-0 with one abstention.
I have a couple of things that confuse me, and maybe if I was a little smarter, it wouldn't confuse me. How do we have the greatest economy in the history of mankind, and also have a national economic emergency at the same time?
Right.
Bruce or Dennis, can you explain to me how the two of them can coexist at the same time? That we've never had a stronger economy in the history of mankind, yet we're also suffering from a national economic emergency. Can you tell me, how do you reconcile those statements?
Well, remember, he's also, Jeffrey, on the same score. We have a record level of oil and gas production in our history, and he's declared a national energy emergency as well, right? As we're overflowing with production at its high water mark. So you reconcile the two because falsity fits his political agenda and campaign. So he just makes up words to mean whatever he wants them to mean.
So Dennis, do you have can explain this to me in my limited intellect on how you can reconcile having a national economic emergency while the economy is the strongest economy in the history of any mankind has ever experienced in the whole human experience?
Well, the strongest economy is obviously a sales pitch.
Yeah.
And the national economic emergency requires certain metrics. And you can make an argument that the United States economy is in trouble based on debt de-dollarization and rising inflation, plus the let's say an overwhelming amount of our discretionary spending going for the military. By 2027, it will be close to 80%. So I'd call that an emergency, but that we have a salesman for a president, and he is trying to sell, put the emphasis on how everything's great. It's not, and he's caught in these contradictions constantly. Just keep this in mind. The entire of the government now is caught in contradictions that are quite intricate, and they're being exposed every day. And so the very fact of the existence of contradictions in so many different places means that we have a group of people who have no clue whatsoever.
I think to justify what Dennis has just said, now we lift oil sanctions on Russia as we're condemning and fighting them in Ukraine. But now we bail them out because the oil sanctions now have been lifted. But I want to go back to add to what Dennis has said, and that is, I think what you accurately described, Dennis, many of the domestic ailments in our economy, the borrowing and the distorted spending. But under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, you have to identify a foreign cause of the emergency, not a domestic one. That's why the first word is international economic emergency, which Trump hasn't come close. He's even suggested it's an international economic emergency that the Brazilian Supreme Court is treating his friend Bolsonaro disadvantageously. Really? It's an international economic emergency that Canada has recognized the Palestinian Authority. So it's obvious that he pays no attention to the statute, and he just makes up whatever he thinks he needs to make up for a political purpose and ties it to some international event. And that's the definition of lawlessness.
But there's another part of that definition I'd like to address, and that is it's also a definition of administrative breakdown, because when the president is issuing those statements, they do have impact on the various departments of the government. And unless there's consistency, you're going to have the gears grinding and not working. And when you take that with the fact that so many valuable government employees were let go, we have right now a government of essentially one person.
Yeah.
and he vacillates so quickly that it's creating confusion, which leads to administrative breakdown. So this is a crisis of governance as well as a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big story today in the Washington Post saying they fired everybody in manning the Freedom of Information Act units of the various governments. I mean, various agencies. This is 1966 Act amended. You helped strengthen it in 1974. So they can't even respond to your Freedom of Information Act. It was critical to have transparency in government. Says, sorry, we don't have anybody to handle the complaint, because they fired everybody in these units. So that, in my judgment, is, again, failing to faithfully execute the laws. You're just removing the people who are entrusted with enforcing the Freedom of Information Act, so that the system doesn't work anymore. There's another kind of, I think, manipulation that's going on that also was revealed by, I think it was in the New York Times today. And that is the United States goes into friendly states like Texas and says, okay, we are going to attack this law that maybe been passed by earlier democratic dispensations in Texas, and then they just concede defeat. For example, in Texas, the federal authorities had challenged a Texas law that said you cannot. No, they didn't do that. Texas passed a law that said that even if you're in the United States without authorization, you can still be subject to scholarship money, attend higher education, as long as you satisfy the qualifications. Texas did that. So then comes the Trump administration, says, well, that's unconstitutional. And he's got a friendly administration in Texas. They say, we agree. It's unconstitutional. The whole thing shuts down. There's no adversarial element anymore. And the general rule we learn in law school, you have to add adversary. You have to have an adversarial proceeding. Otherwise, it's an advisory opinion. And so they're just shopping around for friendly states, and maybe we can just end up settlements and destroy the laws that we don't like between ourselves. Because when you settle in this way, Dennis and Jeffrey, it never goes to a court to decide who's right. It's just the parties agree amongst themselves.
Let me add another layer to this, if I can, as we pass it back to Jeffrey. The corporations gain power under this kind of a structure or unstructured. Let me explain. Let me give an example. My wife just concluded a very important column that is posted on the Kucinich report on Substack. And in it, what she describes is how Monsanto Bayer has captured the administrative part of the government, the executive part of the government, which has essentially, the president issued an executive order that said under an emergency again, which relating to defense, which says that using glyphosate, which is known to cause cancer, specifically non-Hodgkin lymphoma, is important. Using glyphosate is important for the national defense. So he did it at a time that there's tens of thousands of cases that are pending, and victims, maybe over 100,000 victims who have been affected by the use of glyphosate. So that's the executive branch. In the legislative branch, the people in the executive branch have pushed into the Farm Bill a provision that will cause the Farm Bill to essentially remove any kind of prohibitions on the use of glyphosate. And then you have a Supreme Court for the first time accepting a case on this. As you know, Jeffrey, a Supreme Court, maybe you'll take 1% of the cases that are presented. And the Supreme Court is taking this case as to whether or not states can essentially have any kind of a shield, and whether the states have the ability for their to, first of all, have a set of laws that protect the public, and secondly, whether people can't even recover from the lawsuits, or recover money from the lawsuits, or even sue for damages based on the use of glyphosate. So you have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches in this particular time all wobbly on the issue of what is essentially, I believe, a 14th Amendment right. And so this, so while all this confusion is going on, people will say, well, government's not working. Well, there's another sense in which government is working. The question is, who is it working for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets to the fundamental idea of what is the purpose of the government here. It's not to throw its weight behind one party or another. It's to lift artificial weights that may handicap persons from prospering by their own merit and character, and that's it. Other than enforcing contracts, and this is an example, I think, of when you have in the administrative state, when it gets so bloated, money comes into play, and the system will be warped to favor the party who has the most campaign contributions, which is in fact why I say that the most effective campaign reform act possible is get rid of the administrative state. Even if it means it's one of these issues, I believe, Dennis and Jeffrey, where the cure is worse than the disease. Yeah, the markets aren't perfect, but they're far more perfect than when you throw this into politics and get corrupt people to artificially stack the rules in favor of one party against another. And that's why when you go back before the rise of the administrative state, there weren't lobbyists in Washington, D.C. You didn't have campaign contributions where it really didn't amount to anything until William McKinley and the Interstate Commerce Commission, and people started to get worried about regulating railroad rates. And that's, I think, a deficiency. Why should the Congress get involved in deciding, whether this particular additive or environmental contaminant hurts? That's something that the courts can handle through nuisance suits, through negligence, strict liability suits. They've done that with automobiles when automobiles were novel. And then juries decide. But why is the executive branch or the Congress even involved? The common law is quite adequate when it's enforced even-handedly.
Well, there's a lot here for me to comment on.
Yeah.
So first, I'd like to get back to one issue with respect to the tariffs, and then get to some of these other things. One is the tariffs. And when Trump likes to make allusion to the countries that have our enemies and causes harms or whatever, for everybody watching, I want to make clear, tariffs are paid by the importers. Okay. Now, who are the companies now filing for claims? So far, we have Ford. I guess Trump considers Ford an enemy of the state. We have Tesla. Well, maybe there could be some element of truth. Just joking. But Tesla as a company, we have FedEx, and we have Costco. So I don't see any. I don't know if there's any country. I don't think China has filed for a refund. Has Mr. Xi filed for a refund for China to receive refunded? So, the countries are not the importer, okay? So the refunds are not going to countries. They're going to companies, and I assume whoever's importing has a license to do so, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and their license was issued in the United States, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So these are businesses in good standing that were authorized to operate business in the United States, and we're now considering them enemies.
What? And I think, Jeffrey, I think it's more obvious.
Maybe you two can explain that to me. There are no countries involved, right? Is a country an importer?
No.
Is China a licensed importer into the United States?
It's more obtuse than that, I believe, Jeffrey, because the reason why the foreign countries send the products to the United States is because there's a willing buyer at the end, right? That's why they send them. So Trump is saying anybody who buys an imported product is an enemy of the United States. Can you imagine? To tens of millions, maybe it's virtually everybody. That's how obtuse this statement is, But, there are candidates for more or less obtuse, but this is one of the worst.
So, I mean, I think it's, these lies or this bullshit, and I mean the term bullshit in the Harry Frankfurt sense of the word. So I don't mean to be crude, I mean to be philosophical, as Harry Frankfurt wrote a serious tome called On Bullshit. So, and he described why he thought bullshit was even worse than lying. So, because basically his basic premise is simple, is that a liar knows they're lying and is deciding to tell intentionally, an untruth that they know to be an untruth. As a bullshitter just says anything that's convenient for them, and they're indifferent to whether it's truthful or honest. The truth, it's completely irrelevant or not. They can just say whatever is convenient for them to say, and they don't think about whether it's true or not. It's just they want to say it, and they have no basis for saying it, and they don't care that they have no basis for saying it. So I don't mean to be crude in using the term. I mean to be philosophical, and that I agree with Frankfurt is that the last thing you want is the commander in chief, the president of the country, the leader of the free world, to be a complete bullshit. That I don't think bullshit is an attribute people hope to see in leaders, where they can say whatever's convenient for them, and they're really indifferent to whether it's truthful or not. Because that's the difference. One is somebody who's lying intentionally because maybe they get an ad, and the other is just someone who just doesn't really care at all whether what they say is truthful, or not truthful. So again, I want to explain, I don't mean to be crude when I use the term bullshit. I mean to be philosophical and say that, and make the point that this is even worse than lying. So we're not paying to adversaries. We're refunding to people money that was stolen from them, okay? And we're refunding to people who legally operated in the United States. So is the president suggesting that people who have a legitimate business where they're operating, I mean, is the government going in and saying you're an illegal operation, you're an illicit operation, you don't have the right to operate in the United States? I mean, so they're friends of the United States, they're friends of the American people, because they're people who are from, and clearly if they paid a lot of duties and tariffs, it means they bought a lot of merchandise that they're able to resell in the United States. So it meant that they've sold a lot of merchandise, because they're not importing to keep it in inventory, they're importing to sell it to people. So it's the point you made it out, that these were people successfully at delivering to Americans stuff Americans wanted. So can someone explain to me what makes them an enemy? I'm delivering to people stuff produced elsewhere that the American people want. I set up a business, I have a license to set up that business, I do everything by the law, and I paid the tariffs. Even if I thought they were illegal, I paid the tariffs anyway. Can Bruce, Dennis, can you tell me what makes them an enemy of the state, an enemy of the country?
No, they clearly are not the enemies. They're the patriots. And Mr. Trump is the enemy. Also, think of this probable irony on July 4th, 2026, 250th anniversary of the Declaration. The vast majority of our fireworks are going to be imported from China. They produce most of the fireworks, or they send them to Vietnam, not the United States. And I'm sure we'll say at the same time, there's wonderful fireworks that shows how great President Trump is. And he doesn't have any reluctance at all to use fireworks to celebrate the 4th that are imported from China or any place else. So it goes back to what Dennis said. Everything that Trump says is a political calculation. Everything has an ulterior motive, and it reinforces what you said. The idea of true or false doesn't even register in his head. All it is yes or no. Do I think it will help me politically? Does it boost my narcissism? That's it. And that is very, very dangerous. And just to jump a little bit sideways here, when we have a president of the United States who says the war against Iran will end when I feel it in my bones, you're out there, you're risking that last full measure of devotion for the United States, and your commander in chief says, when I feel it in my bones, that's when it ends. That's what you're risking your life for. Could you imagine anything more repugnant than that, more un-American than that, more treasonous than that? That you're sacrificing, risking people's lives for that? You can't even describe, what the end game is. And what's truly amazing is Congress says nothing. We don't even have a headline news, which should be New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. Trump says you should die until his bones tell you that the war is over. I don't know. The lack of perspective is stunning. And I don't know whether this country can survive, much longer with that level of, I think, indifference, stupidity, ignorance, and lack of courage and understanding.
I'm not finished with the tariff issue, but I want to address this too. If we're going to go to the war issue, I'm fine with going to the war issue. But Dennis, you've made speeches in front of Congress against wars in the Iraq War. We had also, I think Ted Kennedy made a very impassioned speech also against the Iraq War. Where is anybody around today making a speech in the type of passion that you had when you gave your speech against the Iraq War, what Ted Kennedy did? Where are these people anymore? Where is there people who will act as a conscience? Okay, whether they win or not, the question is who will speak up and say, I'm going to be the conscience to this body. I mean, there's been no impassioned speech. I mean, I heard of people, it's illegal, whatever. But I mean, really to get up and give an articulate expression of on the floor of the Senate and the House on how horrible this our action in Iran is, and the president's behavior and his lack of justification.
First of all, thank you, Jeffrey. And during the 16 years I served in Congress, there was a period in the run-up after 9/11. There was this march to war that was based on lies. And I called it at that time for what it was and was vilified for doing so. I was called unpatriotic, and I was shunned by most of the media as a result. So over the period of time, from the inception of the run-up to the war of Iraq to the continuation of it through the period that I spent in Congress, I gave about 350 speeches, specifically aimed at don't go to war, stop going to war, get out of Iraq. Here's a plan to get out of Iraq, on and on. And of course, the Bush administration at the same time was considering attacking Iran. And I gave well over 100 presentations. And I was the only one in Congress, I'm pretty sure, and in the House, who gave consistent presentations saying why we should not go to war against Iran. I see war as being a grift, as being, we're in this so-called modern era, but our thinking hasn't evolved. Some of our leaders are still guided by their own pecuniary interests, by the interest of arms manufacturers. Dwight Eisenhower was correct when he said, beware of the military-industrial complex. But also the foreign entanglements that we've talked about in the past played a role in drawing us into wars in the Middle East, particularly our relationship with Israel. As I've said before, I had a very serious exchange with Benjamin Netanyahu in September of 2022 when he came to Washington to push for the fulfillment of an attack on Iraq. And I asked him how many, what other countries besides Iraq would you want to bomb? And I believe you mentioned Iran and Syria and perhaps Libya. All my time in Congress was spent challenging wars because I felt, first of all, there was no justification. It had nothing to do with defense of America, and it was everything about profit and about Middle Eastern politics, which the United States has continually blundered into, and that we shouldn't risk a single dime or an injury, let alone the death of an American soldier under those circumstances. But what happened is, that war received, I led the effort against the war in Iraq and was able to help organize 125 Democrats against it. This headlong momentum for war, once you start a war, resulted in the attack on Iraq and a patriotic drum beating, which saw Bush's approval rating go up. And you saw a war which ended up costing the American people, depending on whose estimate you look at, anywhere from $3 to $5 trillion. I'll tell you, Jeffrey and Bruce, by the time I left Congress on January 3rd, 2013, I was spent. I had spent almost every waking moment of my time fighting these rotten wars based on lies. And this, and what I've learned is that the United States has been misdirected and misguided for decades into war, that we have basically become a leviathan of war, that we have ignored the central purpose of governance, which is, outlined in the preamble, and that we've thrown our lot in with these merchants of death, and unless and until we change direction, unless we stop our march toward this imperial pose, unless we take down this archipelago of bases surrounding the world, we will collapse as a nation. We cannot endure this anymore. And the lessons that I learned in Congress, which, even in this broadcast, I'd be constrained to be able to fully describe. I can tell you that war has never been even a valid argument for war since I've been in government. And I think that that what we have produced here is a circumstance where the American people have not only been disserved, have not only been misgoverned, have not only been misled, but have been criminally deprived of the basic promises that form the compact of governance.
I mean, I think that reinforces what you said, Dennis. If we just take Mr. Trump, he campaigned, well, we got to stay out of all these wars. I wasn't elected to be president of the world, just president of the United States. We're just United States it has to be number one. No other country matters. And now, he pledges, he's going to Thailand, Cambodia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Gaza, the West Bank, Ukraine, Iran, Venezuela, any other country in the world. And I think that shows that it's not so much personalities, is that, the culture, the institutions, have become so warped, where we have secret executive branch power that's infinite. And Congress writes letters from time to time, but that's it. They don't impeach, they don't pass statutes, nothing like the cutting off of funds to conduct combat operations over Vietnam. And part of that, I believe, is that we renounced, at least as far back as the Spanish-American War, the idea that, hey, our greatness, our esteem, our identity as a nation is giving everybody the chance to march to their own drummer, to enjoy liberty, to have their station in life determined by their character and accomplishments. That's it. No, we do not view our greatness as building pyramids, as going to the moon or Mars or any other thing like that. Justice, the barometer of justice, is the metric of success. not controlling other countries. And it's not, I think, an accident. Right at the time, Spanish-American War, we annex Hawaii illegally. Then we go into the Philippines. Then we go into Puerto Rico. They go to Guam. What are these places, Why would they become part of the United States? Is because we decided that, hey, we want to replace the British as the world empire. And we did. But we forgot. What did the British end up? Their empire collapsed. It got overextended economically. They had to borrow money, lend, lease, whatever. After World War II, they were exhausted, and we're following that same plan of Britain. Okay, we're gonna crumble just like the Great Britain and Rome and all previous empires.
If I could add something about, we have talked many times about the role of impeachment, and how impeachment is the one very powerful constitutional device that Congress has to be able to restrain a president who has either falsely taken us into war or who has violated numerous constitutional provisions. Well, I put forth articles of impeachment against President Bush, dozens of them, and also against Vice President Cheney. And in each case, the Democratic leadership rose to defer to committee. Now, and I say this to continue to drive home the point that we do in these podcasts over and over. This is a bipartisan collapse that's occurred. The inability to enforce the Constitution is the result of Congress, of both parties, failing to exercise their responsibilities under the U.S. Constitution to be a co-equal branch of government. And they don't do it. And when that happens, things go further awry. So you can't, with the Constitution that we have, you cannot have a country fall apart unless the first thing that happens is its Constitution begins to be either ineffective or worse, gets crumbled.
Yeah, it becomes an ornament. And what reinforces, I think, the idea, Dennis, especially on the war issue, that it's both parties complicit here. I remember Watergate. I apologize for my age. And initially, out of the Judiciary Committee, led by then John Conyers, one of the articles of impeachment was the illegal bombing and extension of the Vietnam War into Cambodia. You remember they falsified the sorties to make it look like they were not going over Cambodia. Anyway, that was one of the articles. The Democrats' leadership said to John, you got to kick it out. Harry Truman in Korea, wait a minute, we don't want that hanging over our heads. Lyndon Johnson, Gulf of Tonkin resolution. So they removed that, even though the justification was overwhelming, because they're still living inside this war bubble that's existed for decades after decade after decade. And this is even with the Democrats making the charge against Richard Nixon, and the evidence was overwhelming. So that just shows you how much we are committed to imperialism, to try to control all of the world. It goes back to Madeleine Albright as Secretary of State. We see farther than any other country in the world. We have angelic DNA. Everybody wants us to come into their country and destroy it. That's Madeleine Albright. It is celebrated as one of the greatest Secretaries of State by who else? Hillary Clinton, famous for saying, we came, we saw, he died, our stupidity in Libya. So I think you've hit upon the correct point, Dennis. It's both parties. The culture has become decayed. And that, if we don't change the culture, it's just going to come back 2.0, 3.0 over and over and over again. It doesn't matter the personalities. If anything that proves that, it's Trump. Here he held himself out to the mega, I'm just for America first. No, we're not going to get into other countries' domestic politics. They got to run their countries the way they want. And he's done the opposite, He's been far more aggressive than Joe Biden. He doesn't like Joe Biden. He's got us far in more international conflicts than Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Really?
I think there's a famous quote, something like, "In war, truth is the first casualty."
Yeah, Hiram Johnson. Yeah, truth is he's a senator from California. He said that, Jeffrey, right at the time of World War I, when Woodrow Wilson, president, lied that there were not munitions on the Lusitania that was sunk by a German submarine. But there were munitions on the sub, but he wanted to lie about it to justify getting us into war.
So we had the WMDs that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Okay, that lied us into war.
Yeah, the second torpedo.
And I don't understand how anyone. I mean, maybe the people elected are really complete morons. I don't know. They might be. So, but how many lies does Bibi have to tell about the risk Iran has, and that they're going to have, a bomb tomorrow? That he said, for like over 30 years. How does anyone, when he comes into their office, how do they believe anything he has to say? I mean, how does somebody who's told so many lies not get a reputation as being a liar or a bullshitter, and you just stop paying attention to them? I mean, there's a ledger of his lies. It's a long ledger, okay, of indisputable lies. So,
but one of those, I think, Dennis, you witnessed it.
Dennis, can you explain this to me? How Bibi can walk in and people treat him like he's a hero and let him speak to a joint session of Congress? A guy that's lied as much as he has lied. A guy who has said, that has later admitted, that he was been very successful. He's proud of his success at sabotaging any potential peace process. How is this guy even let into the building?
But Dennis, if I let me interject, and I apologize before you respond. Dennis, didn't he told you and the U.S. Congress in 2002, you get rid of Saddam Hussein, Iraq will be the flowering democracy of all the Middle East, and every despot will be destroyed. That's what he told the Congress in 2002, right? You still got all the despots there. No, Iraq is not a democracy. It's a satellite of Iran. I mean, this is one of the worst projections ever. And yet, why would you pay attention to a guy like that? He made that statement to you, Dennis, and everybody else in the Congress.
Well, that's right, he did. And I think we should step back for a moment and think about the power of the spoken word in all of our experience, not just in describing a certain president, a certain prime minister. But, people will generally trust the spoken word. Part of our life experience is to put a lot of stock in what people tell us. We may know better, we may test and retest. When you get to the level of a president or prime minister, yes, there are lives at stake. And people may want to believe, people may have reason to believe, people may have ulterior motives to be able to agree with somebody who may be seen by others as lying. It begins with the power of the spoken word. And if you don't have an opinion one way or another, and you listen to what somebody says, it's not that people are gullible. People generally are trusting, and they will trust until they find that they have been lied to. But when it comes to war, usually that's years later.
Yeah.
That trust is the glue that holds the society and a country together. And the repeated lies, that tangled web we weave, it's another factor in a country disintegrating. And so part of the challenge here is that the conventional media, the so-called legacy media, will often report uncritically what a president or prime minister says. It's happening less and less to our president, who is a bundle of contradictions. and a bundle of contradictory statements. But, people want to trust, and the American people do not want to believe that their president is either a crook, a liar, a cheat, or worse.
Yeah, but if Dennis, sorry, but if you're a member of Congress and you're making a decision about sending people into war, you don't say Bibi came in, he says it's all going to be, we're gonna win the war, okay? George Washington's gonna, come back and be the new leader of Iraq, and they're gonna be a full-fledged constitutional republic that James Madison and Thomas Jefferson would be proud of, and people just shook their head and said, yeah, that sounds good to me, Bibi. I mean, what's their responsibility to the taxpayer? What's their responsibility to the people they send in harm's way? So are you saying that, that people will sit back? I mean, I can understand the power of the word, okay? But there's also the power of your responsibility, of the people's response. I'm talking about you, Bruce, you, Dennis, because, you objected to this, okay, at expense to you. So, you stood up and made yourself heard.
I know.
I'm talking about all the other people who sat back and said,
Jeffrey,
I'm sending people to war.
You're right.
I'm spending a lot of money. I'm spending trillions of dollars to send people to die, okay, and to kill, and for other people to die, okay? And the question is how burdened do I feel by making those decisions?
Yeah, well, here's the way it works. Who helped to get elected? That's the first thing. Who helped somebody get elected? Because, it's the old thing about he who pays the piper calls the tune. And if somebody is elected with the help of certain interest groups who find it important to use the United States military on behalf of their narrow concern, a member of Congress may not represent his or her constituency on that point, and may, in fact, lean towards representing that particular interest. That happens all the time. Yes, the Constitution, when you rate, the members of Congress are sworn in at the beginning of each term. They raise their right hand and they pledge to support the Constitution. But that doesn't happen. It's about interest groups. And ever since, and we've talked about this before, ever since Citizens United, Buckley versus Vallejo, ever since money equaled free speech, congressional races have been more like auctions, where certain members get elected, with the help of the highest bidder, and they're owned. They're captive, and so that's how it happens that members of Congress vote against the interests of their people. It is not in the interest of the American people to go to war. It is not in the interest of the American people to be providing arms to other countries to kill innocent people. It's not in the interest of the American people to have over 50% of our discretionary spending go for the military. But all that happens because of a panoply of interests who are always waiting in line to be served by the members of Congress they helped elect. Part of the responsibility of people to be continually aware of what their representative is doing. Most people aren't. Most people don't know how somebody votes until there's a campaign that states their record or distorts it. This is the financing issue is one of the problems here, because the members are generally going to be supporting those interests who have helped to contribute to them. And in this case, Netanyahu had a lot of friends in the Congress, but he wasn't the only one. There's interests, particularly foreign interests, who have been able to influence the U.S.'s position, or the U.S. state policy has been such that we have decided to use our military in a way that confirm the objectives of a certain corporation, of a certain industry. I mean, this goes on and on. Both of you are well versed in this.
But I think, Jeffrey, it goes back much longer. Remember Mark Hanna, the campaign manager for William McKinley? He famously said there are two things important in politics. The first is money, and I've forgotten what the second one is, right? Already. So, yes. And this is at the time. And I don't think it's an accident, Dennis and Jeffrey, that the empire began right at that time. The Spanish-American War, Guam, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, saying that, we had a manifest destiny to control the world. Because at that point, when you're no longer in favor of liberty, okay, you got to have a government. And if you're going to control the world, you got to have corporations, and you got to send them abroad, build the weapons and the ships and the aircraft. And that's all viewed as heroic, because the goal is no longer liberty. The goal is dominate the whole world. And it's been progressive. We don't understand that. I believe that this is a very, very long-standing problem. It's like, a cancer that metastasizes, but it's slow. Doesn't all happen in 1 year. And ever since this ideology of empire, which began at least back with Teddy Roosevelt and Henry Cabot Lodge and Mahan, and you need a world navy to dominate the world. Don't ask why you want to dominate the world. It's just been a one-way street, and every president gets more power than the predecessor, and Congress doesn't take any of it back, and that's where we are today.
Well, think about the title of the episode of this episode.
Yeah,
is there an end game?
Yeah, no,
nobody knows an end game. Okay, was there even a plan? Okay, right now, clearly there wasn't. Okay, so because we have Trump begging people he's insulted, for years, to now come to an aid in something they never participated. It's not a good idea to make your problem somebody else's problems. Okay, so Trump did not seek the consent of now their allies. Okay, they used a couple of days ago they were enemies. Europe. Okay, he's been insulting Europe all the time. They're our enemies. They're all going to implode, and now he's asking for their help and China's help. Okay. The same country he's calling an enemy that should not get paid back, the money that he stole from them which he didn't really steal from them, he stole from other people with the tariff money. But so basically, if he's at the point where he's got to beg all these other countries and is frustrated that they won't play along with him, at what point does Congress sit back and say, you can't tell us what the end game is, and you clearly don't have a strategy, because you're out there now begging for other people to help you, because clearly things have not worked out how you planned. If things had worked out how you planned, you wouldn't need to be calling all these other countries to come help. So you didn't gain this thing through well. You didn't think it through well. We don't even really want to know what you want to accomplish, because that changes every day. Why the hell is Congress funding this? I mean, really? How do they sit and justify giving this guy, I don't care who it is, any money? I mean, some presidents have lied and whatever, but they got generals in front of them. Here's our plan. This is all the type of stuff they do. And it might be all bullshit, but they got words out there that might have some semblance of credibility. Okay. He's got no end game. They have no plan. They can't articulate anything to anyone on this. He's not making a speech to the American public. Okay. So articulating this. So again, how the hell can Congress fund this?
Okay, hold on. Let me parse this. First of all, Jeffrey, you've just outlined why the Republicans are panicking over the projected loss of the House and the possible loss of the Senate, because there's chaos. And that chaos, which you've described, is having a political effect. The Democrats sit back and watch this, and they're happy to see the Republicans falling apart, because they're going to capitalize on it. Now, now let's go to the seminal issue. You raised some criminal issues as well. Let's go to the seminal issue that you raised, and that is funding. We see the Senate having held up funding for the Department of Homeland Security over the issue of ICE. So that does represent a pushback. The key is going to come on things like, will there be a supplemental appropriation for the Pentagon or for the continuation of this war? I don't even, whatever you call it, against Iran, unauthorized illegal war upon Iran. That's a test. Every bill that comes before the Congress now will be a test of how real this is, whether the Democrats are playing a game or not. And I would suggest to you that even if the Democrats retake the House, that the chances of them continuing to fund wars are pretty good. I saw the exact same happen in 2006 after the Democratic Party in the House ran a campaign against the war in Iraq, took control in 2006, and continued to fund the war. I mean, this is what happens in Washington. It's some kind of a game. Well, it's not a game to the families of soldiers who just lost their life. It's not a game to the people in Iran whose leader has been murdered and whose children have been mass murdered. That's not a game. But, Congress ends up being about who's in control. And there's a point at which Congress has to understand the impact of all this on the American people. That's not just about political power.
Yeah, Dennis, let me ask you this question.
Equation here.
Yes, Dennis, let me ask you this question. Do you think that it is likely that Democrat leadership right now gets together and says, hey, we don't want the war to end, because the longer it extends and endures, the more likely we'll win in November. So we want the war to go south. We'll saddle it with Trump. So the last thing they say, we do not want to cut off the funds. We just do nothing. We have it there. Is it possible that conversation, no matter how repugnant, is at the highest leadership levels of the Democratic Party right now? They want us to get sucked in to another Vietnam, so Trump will have to pay the price.
I sure hope not. Based on past experience, I wouldn't rule it out. When cynicism becomes so powerful that it overwhelms common sense and overwhelms the responsibility to protect the lives of our soldiers, it's time to say a pox on both parties.
Yeah, for sure. I raised that hypothetical because I remember during the impeachment of Richard Nixon, Jerome Waldy from California, he once argued, hey, we got to let Nixon stay around a little bit longer so we'll get a better victory in the midterm elections. Didn't matter whether, he was really quite deranged his last days. That's why the Secretary of Defense said, don't follow an order to initiate war unless I give it to you. And yet Jerome Waldy was willing to say, yeah, let's let Nixon stay around longer so we can profit politically, even if it means disaster to the United States. I mean, and I don't want to say the Democrats are the only ones who harbor these kinds of thoughts. Republicans, it's the same way, which is why it's an earmark of how decayed and contemptible congressional culture is.
Dennis, did you want to comment on that?
What could I possibly add?
So I mean, for me, I don't think, I share Bruce's skepticism. I think there's probably very few people in Congress who really care about the soldiers who are in harm's way.
Right.
And I think there's a very few of them care about the innocent victims in Iran and the collateral damage being caused, through, Iran's, in my opinion, justifiable efforts to defend itself. I mean, I don't know. I haven't. Who knows what's being truthful and what's being reported? But it seems to me, if a country is using, it's offering its haven for the United States military, and that military, and from there they're launching attacks against Iran. It seems to me that they are now a participant in the war. So, they could stay out of the war by saying, you can use this as a warehouse, but you can't use it as a base to attack other countries. I think these countries have a right to say that, but I guess they don't want to. So it seems to me they've made themselves targets by being an ally that is benefiting the U.S.'s military efforts. So I think Iran is justified in what they're doing, and I think the United States would be doing the same thing Iran would be doing. So so this is not a consequence of bad behavior on Iran's part. This is a consequence of our bad behavior, in starting a war of choice, without by one person deciding I'm going to push a button and people will go to war. Now, I think going back to how horrible I think members of Congress are, and Bruce mentioned this before, we had, I think it was 6 members, the seditious 6 supposedly, who came out and made a strong statement saying, the military has an obligation and responsibility that if the president asks them to do something that's illegal, that they should not do it. And now they're silent now that this has actually occurred. Now we have a president asking the military to do something without a declaration of war. Does the military not think this is a war? Do they think this is just a little exercise? Well, I don't know what the military thinks. When they look at the military handbook, does the military think that this doesn't meet the definition of war? I wonder what meets the definition of war in their handbook. So, to me, there's so many bad actors in this, and Congress could just call up the military and say, why are you doing this? You don't have a declaration, so why are you following anything this guy in the White House says? Because we have a little book. It's called the Constitution, and his book says you don't get to go anywhere unless we give the authorization, and we haven't. So why are you doing this? So it seems to me some members of Congress can make a stand and say, I'm going to get these generals in, and I'm going to ask them this question. Why do you think you have the right to do this? The guy's not commander in chief yet because we haven't declared war. So he can't give you instructions until we do that.
Yeah, Jeffrey, just to add what you said, Ralph Nader, and Lou Fisher have written letters to the 6 members of Congress who prepared that video, saying under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the rule of military law, you're obligated, not an option, you're obligated to disobey clearly illegal orders. We said, wait a minute, now you need to reduce those academic statements to reality. Where are you with regard to obeying an order to attack Iran? This is a crime of aggression, crime against peace, according to our own Nuremberg precedents. Where are you to say that we're committing murder in the Caribbean and in the Eastern Pacific by using the military to exterminate persons who we say are drug traffickers, although we've never proved them, and haven't heard back from them, but said, listen, now you have to actually translate, your words into some meaningful expression. And also, you should be encouraged by the fact that the grand jury refused to indict you for the first, concocted case of saying you're trying to foment, insurrection or insubordination in the military. But if this isn't illegal, the idea of illegality doesn't mean anything. So, and again, at that point, we might as well be back to Julius Caesar and despotism. There isn't any rule of law anymore if this isn't clearly illegal war. Congress hasn't authorized it. It hasn't declared war. Iran was not attempting to attack the United States. We've got thousands of nukes. Iran maybe has the potential for a couple. It wasn't threatening any of our security interests. To the extent that we had any interest in that region, it was because we were sticking military bases there, which we have which is senseless in any event. Those military bases aren't to protect the United States. They're to protect Qatar, Kuwait, or Bahrain, or Oman.
If somebody's family, who had a relative killed, okay, and they can identify where the bomb came from. Why can't they come to the United States and say, this is an illegal war, this person who dropped this bomb killed these people, and we're being charged, we're charging them with murder?
Well, I think
the shorter answer is the doctrine of sovereign immunity. The United States, and I think government sovereign immunity, I think, is a disaster. I think the government has a higher and more imperative obligation to comply with the law than ordinary citizens because they can do so much more harm. But right now, unless Congress enacted a law consenting to such a suit, it would be blocked by the doctrine of governmental immunity.
Well, I'm not sure of, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to drop off the call in about a minute, but I don't, notwithstanding sovereign immunity, I'm not sure that those parents who lost their children in that missile attack on the school in Manab wouldn't be able to sue the United States for damages for the loss of life of their children. I want to state unequivocally my deep and total opposition to what the United States has done in Iraq, beginning, with the attacks on the 28th of February, and even prior to that, the so-called attacks on various nuclear facilities. I am totally and unalterably opposed to what has happened, and I feel that everyone involved has to be held accountable. This has been a very important discussion, and I'm grateful to have had an opportunity in some way to participate. So, Jeffrey, thank you. And
Can I ask you one question, Dennis, before you go? Just one quick question.
Sure.
Your knowledge, Iran's program as a signatory to the nuclear, whatever they were doing, Iran's program, according to international law, was a legal or illegal program?
It was legal.
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
So, okay, thank you, Dennis.
Just to add, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty does permit the development of nuclear technology for civilian purposes. And it goes back as far as the Shah of Iran. He got civilian nuclear technology from the United States for civilian purposes.
So we attacked a country that had been in compliance with international law, and its program was completely legal.
The nuclear program was, listen, I'm not trying to defend the Iranian regime. They may be doing other things that are covert, like they're trying to assassinate dissidents in foreign countries. That's not legal. But the nuclear program had not been shown to be in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. If anything, the 5 grandfathered countries, including the United States, which were given authority to maintain nuclear arsenals not subject to any inspection, had an obligation under Article 6 to negotiate immediately for a complete nuclear disarmament, which has been ignored for over 70 years, and they've done nothing on that score. 50 years, not 70 years. So if there's any country that was in non-compliance, it was in the United States. And I want to underscore, the United States doesn't give any inspection authority to any outside agency. Iran was subject. You may criticize the amount of inspection, but they were permitting others to inspect their nuclear capabilities, but the United States, never would that happen. The double standard.
And there's generally broad agreement that Israel is a nuclear power. Is that correct?
Oh, for sure.
Probably
400 nuclear
weapons. And they're, if so, they have decided not to sign any treaty.
Correct. That is right. In fact,
how many nuclear powers are non-signatories to that treaty?
Pakistan is a non-signatory and has nuclear weapons. India is a non-signatory and has nuclear weapons. North Korea was a signatory at one time, developed nuclear weapons, and then withdrew from the treaty. So those are the countries right now who are non-signatories and have nuclear weapons. So you count them up, Israel, Pakistan, India, North Korea. That's 4 countries that we know have nuclear weapons, but refuse to try.
So a greater threat to the United States is a country that had been a signatory,
Right.
okay, and was accepted being under a
Inspection regime. Inspection regime.
regime. They're a big threat, but those that have nuclear weapons that decided to withdraw or not but enter the treaty, okay, they're not a threat to us. Okay?
And not only that, and have no inspection regimes whatsoever.
Okay, so can you explain the logic to that?
Yeah, we just pick out. It's the double standards. We pick out our friends and the enemies, and hold them to different standards. So it's not a principled perspective. It's just one based upon what our political ambitions are, our international ambitions are, and that's it. In the United States, still, Jeffrey, there is a rule in the executive branch that says we can never, in the executive branch, acknowledge Israel has nuclear weapons. Even when in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, they mention they have nuclear weapons. The United States can't do that. That shows you the degree of influence Israel has.
Now, do we carve that out for other countries as well? Are we giving other countries the right to develop nuclear weapons, and that we promise that
we'll never expose it? No. Israel is the only one.
What's the logic? What's the logic behind that?
Israel has a lot of political influence in the United States, and AIPAC makes a lot of campaign contributions. That's the logic. Anyway, that's it's one of the many, you can't articulate them all, ulterior motives that drive, unfortunately, the government in general. And it underscores, Jeffrey, why we have to take Ronald Reagan's trust but verify into all walks of life. It's not just with Gorbachev or nuclear missiles. Trust but verify. Don't ever believe anything the government tells you until you verify. Presume it's a lie because the government has an incentive to lie, and the burden of proof should be on the government to show that it's true before you acknowledge that truthfulness. And that's something that you learn from experience. Lie after lie after lie, the bomber gap that wasn't a bomber gap, the missile gap that wasn't a missile gap, the Chinese-Soviet unity when they had the split. Anyway, you can go on and on and on. And you were mentioning the lies, the second torpedo attack in the Gulf of Tonkin that justified the Gulf of Tonkin resolution never happened either. And that's why I believe that. Let me tell you this kind of anecdote I received from Daniel Ellsberg before he passed. He said, Bruce, the first day that I was assigned to the Secretary of Defense's office, there had been a U.S. pilot who had been shot down in China. And the first thing, and Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, was scheduled to give a press conference that morning at 10 o'clock. So he comes in, I think he's worked with John McNaughton's office. He was in the deputy. His assignment, he said, Bruce, you got to come up with 10 lies that McNamara can tell the press before he speaks to conceal the fact that we were spying on China. Okay. And read the Pentagon Papers, lie after lie, light at the end of the tunnel, all these lies that are endless. And that's why if you have to choose between presuming what the government says is always a lie until otherwise, as opposed to presuming it's truthful until it's proven a lie, you're more likely to be safer and more accurate to presume everything the government says is a lie. And I'm telling, this isn't just about Trump. It's about everybody. It's just the way that the government operates. It's Republicans, Democrats, anybody who's in the government ends up lying. And that's the way you preserve liberty. Remember, the eternal vigilance is the price of liberty.
And sunlight is the best disinfectant. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So I think this is an important practical and philosophical point. If you think about I'm just gonna not talk too much about Bitcoin, but mention, I would say people, one of the things about that describe as Bitcoin is a trustless protocol. And what's meant by trustless protocol is that Bitcoin was designed in a way where you don't assume any actor is a good actor. You assume that they're all looking to try and cheat, but there is no incentive. The system is designed so well that there is no profit associated with cheating. With cheating, there's only a cost, and that's what prevents people from cheating. Is that you're likely to get caught. There's a high cost of getting caught, and there's checks and balances in the system. So that so far there's been no indication in all these years that anyone has ever cheated, which meant that there's no double spending problem, and that the ledger always tells the truth. So if you think about designing any sort of robust system, to design a robust system that's not fragile, where truth is important, you want to design a ledger where there's provenance, a ledger where people are responsible and accountable and trackable and traceable, for their actions. So, and I guess going back to the point that you made earlier about the Freedom of Information Act, there's really inadequate procedures for people to validate that the things they're being told are truthful. And it's not like a politician comes out and says, I say something and here are the footnotes and citations, so you can check out everything I say. There's a written document and everything is cited and things like that. And so it's easy to prove whether truth or not. And if I don't tell the truth, you can bring perjury charges against me. I mean, so the system has really, unfortunately, they thought if ambition really checked ambition, then every time somebody lied, there would be a consequences associated with the lie. But if they're all lying, then there's no incentive to have anyone suffer a consequence from lying, because they're all lying. And the system becomes, instead of a system of, ambition, checking ambition, you have ambition reinforcing ambition, because they're all liars. And no, they don't want to call anyone out in being a liar, because then they'll be called out, right, for being a liar. So when you have a system like that, it becomes a fragile system. That's not a robust system. That's a fragile system. So we have a very fragile system to protect our liberty, as you mentioned. And there's no proposals to make it a system that we could trust again. That's why I wrote a article. It was published in the Sheer Post, SCHEERPOST, I think. Is the name of the publication, and I titled it "Trustless Government." So the whole point of it was not necessary to change the ideology; it was just to set up mechanisms under which we would know that we were being told the truth. It doesn't mean we're going to agree on what people decide. It means that it would be harder to lie under this system. So we might make better decisions if we knew the truth. So, and this is, I think, the sad situation is like I agree. Since you can't prove who's telling the truth, you just got to assume everybody's telling a lie. Mm-hmm. And really, how do you govern if you assume that everybody is telling a lie? And this is the frustration of the system. This is exactly what the politicians want. What politicians want is you to basically kind of opt out, because it's just impossible. And it's to demoralize people, so they're not really politically active. If they get so demoralized by the system, and their inactivity is that vacuum is what gives them, the power they have. So it's a whole system of perverse incentives that are reinforcing each other. It's an abomination, but I think also what's an abomination, is the act of. Even if people, let's say you don't like Iran, let's say you like that Trump did this because you don't like Iran. Okay, first is how anyone could justify that this is constitutional. I guess the only justification they have is this is what we've been doing, for the last 70 years. Okay, so so statute of limitations, that clause of the Constitution has been waived, because it hasn't been enforced for a long period of time, so it's lost the right to be enforced. I mean, so some people might rationalize that judgment. Why not give Trump the same right you've given to every president since Truman? So, and there's some validity to that argument from a practical sense. But if you really want to restore a constitutional order and your priority is not giving the executive power he wants, but living under a constitutional order, then you don't want him to have it. If you're going around saying, I don't like immigrants, rule of law, okay, then you got to apply rule of law everywhere, not just when it's convenient for you. So some people just are just convenient when somebody does something, and it's whether it's legal or illegal, they don't care because they agree, it's getting done. But then they shouldn't say they care about rule of law. They should just admit, I want to go to war because I agree with it. I want to go to war because I want to do mass deportations because I like the policy, and it has nothing to do with whether it's grounded in law or not grounded in law. It's the outcome I want to have, and I support anyone who wants to do that. And whether they're doing it according to the law or not, I'm kind of indifferent. I don't really care as long as they're doing what I want them to do.
Well, Jeffrey, let me interject here because I think it's important to unspool the implications of that kind of idea and thinking. There is nothing in the Constitution that indicates that one portion is a super constitution and it has neon lights on it and it's more important to enforce it than any other. They all have equal dignity. And if you say, I don't care about the declare war clause, then your neighbor can say, I don't care about the First Amendment. And the other neighbor says, I don't care about the Second Amendment. So everybody then just picks and chooses which parts of the Constitution they feel like they want to support, because there's no articulable stopping point once you decide you can flout any provision of the Constitution. At that point, you're back to the law of the jungle, and the Constitution is completely meaningless. So you can't stop and say, well, you can squint at the declare war clause, but you got to be clear-eyed about everything else. Really? Where do you get that? How do you find that in the Constitution? It's just something you made up. So it's really an attack completely on the idea of rule of law. And with regard to repetition, which is true, at least since Harry Truman decided to go to war career on his own. Listen, repetition doesn't make it legal.
Right.
We had separate but equal from Plessy and Ferguson for 58 years. We went into the Supreme Court and said, well, we've been violating the 14th Amendment so long. We've been treating blacks as non-human for so long. It's now legal. It was still illegal, and the Supreme Court held that, and Brown against the Board of Education. This idea that, once you violate it once with impunity, it makes it legal. It's a complete absurdity. It's like you're a serial rapist or a serial murderer. It becomes legal after the 100th time because you got away with it 99 times without a penalty. Really? So you reward the worst criminals of all. But the most important point is, once you accept the idea, the ends justify the means, and you ignore one part of the Constitution with impunity, game's over. At that point, everybody picks up which parts they want to comply with, what not, and no longer have a Constitution at all.
And again, I think it's important to point this out. This is an anniversary year.
Yeah.
This is an anniversary year that we're supposedly making a big deal about. 250 years since we declared our independence. And people should know what this means, and they don't seem to know what it means.
No, they don't know what it means. Donald Trump is going to have fireworks, whatever. But I think, Jeffrey, that adds to the idea. It was not only independence in isolation. It was independence with an understanding of self-evident truths. The most important one, that we're all endowed with the right, unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and governments are formed to secure those rights. It wasn't just independence. Other countries got independence, but our independence was unique because it was predicated on the idea that the individual human being was the highest dignity, the highest power in the land, and that government was to serve them and protect their rights. Government had no inherent rights that weren't given by the individuals to be governed by the consent of the governed. That was truly revolutionary. I do not believe, Jeffrey, today, a majority of Americans understand that and believe that. Understand that, yeah, all of us are superior to government with these unalienable rights. and we
Okay.
enjoy them, and we're not encroaching on anybody else. That's got to be back into the schools, not just the schools. They got to be taught by parents, by religious figures, by friends, and everybody else, because it's been entirely lost. We're back to the ideas of kings and queens and emperors, and maybe you get a Magna Carta that takes a few crumbs away from limitless power in the executive. No, everyone's got to be taught at an early age. You always ask why. Where's your authority to tell me to do that? If you don't have a good answer, I get to choose myself. Right?
I want to ask a couple questions now, leading questions. Okay. Who had a bigger mandate, George Washington or Donald Trump?
Yeah. Washington, unanimous twice, the Electoral College.
Second question. Okay. Who do you think had a higher favorability rating, Washington or Trump?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. George Washington, again, he became a legend. He started out a hero, became a legend. Because
who do you think had a
power? He gave up power willingly. Yeah.
So who do you think had a higher unfavorably rating?
Unfavorable? Mean Trump or Washington? Yeah, Trump by far, for sure.
So if you had favorable versus not favorable, the net number of favorable, who do you think had higher, Washington or Trump?
Yeah, Washington, without a shadow of a doubt.
Okay. Now, could you see? And George Washington was a general, right?
Yeah, he was a general.
So we had somebody who avoided war and somebody who led us in war, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and George Washington led people under very difficult circumstances, right?
He did. And in fact, he issued a neutrality proclamation. He didn't want to get the U.S. involved in these Napoleonic wars with the U.K. and Europe. So he issued a neutrality proclamation. He signed the law that Congress enacted called the Neutrality Act. And he kept us out of war for sure.
So would you think George Washington would say, Supreme Court, I want tariffs. I don't care what the Constitution says. I want it. I want it bad. Okay,
no.
That's all you need to know. Okay, you think?
No, but on that score, Jeffrey, remember, he's there, and he has John Jay during his second term negotiate the Jay Treaty. It was a treaty, and it was the treaty that prescribed the tariffs, not an executive order. A treaty.
And explain for people listening, what's the burden of getting a treaty approved?
Yeah, a treaty requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate to make it legally effective. And that was done with regard to the Jay Treaty. And it shows that, but Congress, part of the reason why Congress has to be a partner in raising revenue, and this is the way in which the Senate is made a partner. It's not simple majority, a 2/3 majority in order for a treaty to be ratified.
It's a supermajority.
Yeah.
So, and George Washington understood it was a supermajority.
Yes.
Okay. And he went and he did it as a treaty, knowing what it requires. He didn't just say George Washington's signature. Who needs Congress? You got George Washington's signature. I never lie. Okay.
Yeah, right.
He didn't think that was the way to do it, right?
No.
Okay. Is there a reason why? Because he didn't think he was above the Constitution, right?
That's correct. I mean, he also said that relatedly that under the Constitution, only Congress has the authority to declare war, and therefore I cannot use the military in any offensive fashion until Congress has deliberated upon the issue and authorized it. And remember, George Washington was the presiding officer at the Constitutional Convention. Correct. He wasn't a stranger. He was present at the creation.
So he heard these debates.
Yeah, of course he is.
And he had the mental capacity to somewhat understand them, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So, and he kind of had the wisdom when he was writing documents, that and put to President's point of view, he had people like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison help draft these documents, right?
Yeah. In fact, his inaugural address was written by James Madison.
And when he was going to quit the first time and not run for re-election, James Madison wrote his first farewell address. And then basically
Hamilton added on the second one. Yes.
The second one. Okay. So, and we would say that Madison is someone who kind of understood the Constitution, right? Kind of, right?
Yes, he was
not as much as Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. Not as much as Trump. Okay. So Washington led us in war. He presided over the Constitutional Convention. He had a lot of these conversations with James Madison, who might have some knowledge. Okay. George Washington was actually a general. Okay. And we're supposed to know that we're supposed to assume that Donald Trump knows more than George Washington and James Madison.
Yeah.
Okay. In this 250th anniversary, how illiterate are we as a people?
Yeah.
If we can't understand that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, is it just an ancient relic? Is it just something we look at and say, gee, this was a great, I mean, that's what it's treated like. It's
Yeah.
treated like just this relic that has no relevance today. Okay.
That's correct. And it's kind of like a museum piece. You go to the National Archives if you come to Washington, D.C. Well, it's stick it in the museum, but it doesn't have any other authoritative justification. The same with the Constitution. You have it looks like an adornment you put on the wall or you memorize, but you really have no clue, what you're talking about. But it goes back, in my judgment, Jeffrey, to education again. We don't teach civics anywhere, and so you have members of Congress, the public in general, leaders in all walks of life, clueless about what the Constitution and Declaration of Independence say and mean. And if you want to, I think, get a glimpse at how far we've tumbled, if you read the initial debates in Congress, first they was called Annals of Congress, then they was called the Congressional Globe, now the Congressional Record. But read about the debates surrounding the Monroe Doctrine, the Mexican-American War, the War of 1812. You'll recognize how deeply these members knew and had mastered the Constitution. And these were serious debates about what was being done as legal or not. Today, you read the Congressional Record, it's blather, complete blather. They have no clue and hardly even reference the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence anymore. And how you are able to awaken, reverence for these documents that are the wisest, perhaps, ever composed for a political community is a challenge for everybody. But ultimately, the American people decide one by one. How are you going to spend your time? It goes back to eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. If you don't care about liberty, you don't care about living under despotism, do nothing, go to sleep. You'll end up being a serf on a plantation, for sure.
Agreed. Any other last words you'd like to have, Bruce, in wrapping up today's the Fine Print?
Well, I do believe that for our audience, be alert to this possibility that I think becomes greater the more the Iran war goes south and inflation and the economy goes south as well. And that is the credible possibility that Mr. Trump, seeing that he will lose in November to Democrats, that he will invoke the Insurrection Act and have the military shut down polling places and seize voting machines. The more that can be a subject of conversation, the more it may deter Mr. Trump. And again, we are going back, Jeffrey, to the obligation to disobey clearly illegal orders. Those would be clearly illegal orders if the military received them. I'm not saying this is a prognostication with certainty, by no means, but knowing what Mr. Trump did on January 6, 2021 to stay in power, it's certainly plausible, especially when he has already said he doesn't actually see why there even ought to be elections. And if the Republicans don't win the midterms, he's going to be impeached. He's already entertaining that idea in his head and seeing how erratic he can be. And his lust for remaining in power, say, demonstrated January 6th, 2021. Be alert for that. Let's hope it doesn't happen. But if it does, we need to demonstrate the courage of 1776 and say, no, it's not going to happen. Push back and prevent it from succeeding.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And we'll see everyone. Speaking on this topic, just before we say goodbye, Bruce, let me know what you'd like to set up for. I think we discussed maybe discussing Cass Sunstein's book, Separation of Powers.
Yeah.
Another date. Another date to discuss.
Yeah, it's very, very timely. Yeah, the separation of powers that now has crumbled doesn't exist anymore. But Anyway, we'll do that. I thank you, Jeffrey, for reminding me.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.